In 1953, a widow in Barnsley could feed herself for an entire week on 1 shilling and 9pence. 1 pot, 1 ring on the stove, and she ate better than most of us do today. The meals on this list cost pennies to make, use barely any washing up, and were designed for exactly this. 1 person, 1 kitchen. 1 life lived quietly but well. Number 18 on this list was the meal district nurses actually recommended to elderly patients in the 1960s because it contained almost every nutrient the body needs. And number 7 was so cheap that even during rationing, nobody went without it. These 25 meals were perfected by women who cooked alone after the war took their husbands, after children moved south for work, after the house fell silent except for the kettle and the wireless. They knew something we have forgotten, that cooking for one is not sad. It is a skill, and it might be the most important skill a person can have. Before we start, hit that subscribe button because what you are about to learn could change how you eat for the rest of your life. Let us count down the 25 cheapest vintage one-pot meals that kept Britain's seniors fed, warm, and independent. Number 25. Bread and milk. The simplest meal on this list, and perhaps the most honest. When energy was low and the cupboard was nearly bare, a bowl of torn bread soaked in warm milk with a sprinkling of sugar was supper. Your grandmother would heat a half pint of milk in a saucepan, tear 2 thick slices of bread into rough pieces, and pour the warm milk over. A pinch of nutmeg if she had it. A teaspoon of sugar if she did not. The whole thing cost less than 3pence and took 3 minutes to prepare. By the 1950s, the National Food Survey recorded that bread and milk appeared as an evening meal in nearly 1 in 5 households with elderly residents. It was gentle on the stomach, warm in the chest, and required nothing but a single saucepan and a bowl. Doctors in the 1960s quietly approved of it for patients recovering from illness. The combination of slow-release carbohydrate and protein kept blood sugar stable through the night. We would call it basic now, but for a generation that measured comfort in warmth, not complexity, bread and milk was enough. Number 24. Onion broth. A whole onion, sliced thin, sweated in a knob of butter until golden and sweet, then covered with boiling water from the kettle and simmered for 20 minutes. A slice of stale bread was laid in the bottom of the bowl, and the broth was ladled over. That was supper for thousands of pensioners across the Midlands and the North in the years after the war. The onion provided flavour far beyond its cost, which was about 2pence in 1955. Some women added a crumble of cheese on top and slid the bowl under the grill for a minute, creating something that tasted remarkably close to French onion soup without ever knowing the name. The bread soaked up the broth and became soft and almost meaty. 1 pot, 1 onion, 1 person fed and content. This meal survived well into the 1970s in mining villages where widows lived alone in terraced cottages. The smell of fried onions drifting through the back lane every evening around 5:30. Number 23. Porridge with salt. Not the sweet, fruited porridge of modern breakfast menus, but the proper Scottish and Northern English way. Oats cooked in water with a pinch of salt. No sugar, no honey, no blueberries. A cup of oats cost about a penny in the early 1950s and lasted 2 meals. Your grandmother would stir them slowly in 1 saucepan, adding water gradually until the porridge thickened and pulled away from the sides. She sometimes ate it standing or sat by the window watching the street. Porridge made with salt has a savory depth that sweet porridge cannot match. It sits in the stomach for hours, releasing energy slowly. Pensioners who ate porridge daily reported fewer visits to the doctor, according to a 1961 study by the Scottish Council for Health Education. 1 pot, 1 wooden spurtle if you were proper about it. Nothing wasted, nothing fancy. Just fuel. Number 22. Potato soup. 3 potatoes, 1 onion, a pint of water, salt and pepper. That was the recipe scribbled in pencil on the inside covers of the Women's Institute cookbooks across Wales and the West Country. Peel the potatoes, dice them small, soften the onion in a little dripping or margarine, add the potatoes and water, and simmer until everything falls apart. Mash it roughly with a fork in the pot. Some added a splash of milk at the end for richness. The whole meal cost about 4p and produced 2 generous bowls. For a pensioner living alone on a state pension of just over £2 a week in 1955, potato soup was the foundation of the weekly menu. It appeared on Monday, was reheated on Tuesday, and by Wednesday the pot was scraped clean. The taste was plain but honest, the kind of warmth that settled behind the ribs and stayed there all evening. Nobody wrote about potato soup in recipe columns. Nobody needed to. Everyone already knew. When your grandmother felt a cold coming on, or simply could not face anything heavy, she would boil a pint of water with a crumbled stock cube, then slowly pour in a beaten egg while stirring. The egg cooked instantly in ribbons, creating a silky, golden broth that tasted far richer than it had any right to. A few slices of spring onion, if she had them. A shake of white pepper. Done. The whole thing took 5 minutes and cost about 3p. This was the meal of late evenings and early mornings, of feeling under the weather but still needing something warm inside. 1 saucepan, 1 egg, 1 stock cube. It was the kind of cooking that nobody called cooking because it was too simple to count. But it nourished, it comforted, and it kept a person going until morning. A small piece of bacon, the cheapest end cut from the butcher at maybe 1 shilling, went into the pot with a cup of red lentils and enough water to cover. Simmer for 40 minutes. The lentils dissolved into a thick, smoky porridge that clung to the spoon. The bacon flavored everything, and when it was done, the meat could be pulled apart with a fork and stirred back through. This was the meal district nurses in the Northeast recommended to elderly patients living alone because it contained protein, fiber, iron, and B vitamins in a single pot. A bag of red lentils cost 6p and lasted a fortnight. The bacon could be the cheapest offcut the butcher had. Nothing was wasted. The leftovers set firm overnight and could be sliced and fried the next day, creating an entirely different meal from the same ingredients. Thrift upon thrift upon thrift. Number 19. Tinned tomato stew. A tin of tomatoes. A diced onion. A diced potato. A pinch of sugar. All into 1 pot, simmered for 25 minutes until the potato softened and the tomatoes broke down into a thick, rust-colored sauce. Some added a handful of macaroni in the last 10 minutes to make it more substantial. Others dropped a slice of bread into the bottom of the bowl, the way they did with onion broth. A tin of tomatoes cost about 5p in the mid-1950s, making this one of the cheapest hot meals available. For pensioners who could not get to the shops easily, tinned tomatoes were a cupboard staple that kept for months. The stew was surprisingly satisfying, the natural sweetness of the cooked tomatoes balancing the starch of the potato. Nobody gave it a name. It was just what you made when you had a tin and a potato and nothing else. Number 18. Pea and ham soup. This was the staple meal that appeared more often than any other in the diets of elderly Britons living alone in the 1950s and the 1960s. A ham bone, sometimes bought for just 3p from the butcher because nobody else wanted it, went into the pot with a cup of dried split peas, a chopped onion, and a diced carrot. Add water to cover, then simmer for 2 hours. The peas disintegrated into a thick green soup, so dense that a spoon could stand upright. The ham bone released smoky, salty flavor that made the whole kitchen smell like a proper dinner. One bone could flavor 3 batches of soup across a week. The dried peas cost next to nothing. This single meal provided more protein and fiber than most modern ready meals, and it cost a fraction of the price. It reheated beautifully and actually improved overnight as the flavors deepened. For a person living alone, pea and ham soup was not just food. It was company. The slow bubble of the pot, the smell filling the house, the ritual of stirring and tasting, turned a quiet afternoon into something purposeful. Number 17. Cauliflower cheese soup. When cauliflower was cheap at the market, maybe 4p for a whole head in the late 1950s, your grandmother would chop it roughly, boil it in water until tender, then stir in a handful of grated cheese until it melted through. The result was a thick, pale soup that tasted creamy without any cream at all. The cheese did all the work, adding richness and body that turned a plain vegetable into something warming and complete. A sprinkle of mustard powder lifted the flavor further. This was the meal of women who knew instinctively what modern nutritionists had to be taught. That cheese and brassicas together create a complete protein. 1 saucepan, no waste. The stalky bits of the cauliflower went in too, softened past recognition. Nothing was trimmed except the leaves, and even those sometimes went into the pot for the goodness in them. You could eat like this for a week on what a supermarket sandwich costs today. Number 16. Corned beef hash. 1 tin of corned beef, 2 large potatoes, 1 onion. Everything diced and fried together in the same pan until the potatoes crisped at the edges and the corned beef broke down into salty, meaty shreds. A splash of Worcestershire sauce if there was a bottle in the cupboard. Eaten straight from the pan with a fork if nobody was watching. A tin of corned beef cost about 1 shilling in the mid-1950s and fed 1 person generously, twice. Pensioners kept tins stacked in the larder like insurance policies. When the weather was bad and the shops were shut, corned beef hash was there. The crispy bits at the bottom of the pan, caramelized and almost burnt, were the best part. Nobody who grew up eating this ever forgot the taste, that combination of salt, starch, and the faint metallic sweetness of tinned beef, cooked hot enough to develop a crust. First pattern break. Here is where things get interesting. The one-pot meals of elderly Britons were not just about saving money. They were about saving energy, not emotional energy, though that too, but actual physical energy. A pensioner with arthritis in both hands could not stand at the stove for an hour. A widow with a bad hip could not carry heavy dishes to the sink. These meals were designed around limitation. 1 pot meant 1 thing to wash. 1 ring on the stove meant 1 flame to watch. Short cooking times meant less standing. This was engineering disguised as cooking, and nobody gave these women credit for it because the food looked too simple to be clever. But clever is exactly what it was. Number 15. Leek and potato soup. The Welsh grandmother's answer to everything. Leeks from the garden, potatoes from the sack, water from the tap. Chop, simmer, mash. The leeks softened into silk. The potatoes thickened the broth into something almost creamy. A pinch of salt, maybe a knob of butter stirred in at the end. By the 1960s, leek and potato soup was the most commonly made soup in Wales, appearing in kitchens from the valleys to the coast. A single batch fed 1 person for 2 days. The cost was negligible if you had a garden, and even from the greengrocer the ingredients rarely exceeded 6p. The soup improved with each reheating, the flavors deepening and mellowing. It was the sort of meal that made a cold house feel warmer just by existing. Number 14. Oxtail in 1 pot. Oxtail bought for 6p at the butcher went into a heavy pot with carrots, onions, and a bay leaf. It was covered with water and simmered for 3 hours. The gelatine from the bones turned the broth into something rich and glossy, almost syrupy when it cooled. The meat slipped off the bone and shredded into the liquid. One oxtail fed a person for 3 days. Monday it was soup. Tuesday the leftover meat was eaten cold with bread. Wednesday the pot was scraped clean with a crust. The flavor was deeper than any beef stew, the kind of richness that modern stock cubes try to imitate and never quite reach. For pensioners living alone, oxtail was luxury at a poverty price. Number 13. Tripe in milk. Tripe simmered gently in milk with sliced onions until both were tender and the milk had thickened into a thin, savory sauce, eaten with bread for dipping. In Lancashire, this was comfort food for elderly residents who had grown up with it and never stopped. The tripe was cheap, the milk was cheap, and the result was a gentle, easily digested meal that suited older stomachs. By 1958, tripe stalls in Bolton and Wigan still served this to pensioners who came every week. The same order every time. 1 pot, 1 spoon, 1 chair pulled close to the fire. Number 12. Rice pudding on the hob, not the baked version. The stove-top version. 2 tablespoons of pudding rice stirred into a pint of milk, simmering over a low flame for 30 minutes. Sugar to taste. A scrape of nutmeg. The rice swelled and softened until the milk turned thick and creamy. Eaten warm from the saucepan if you were alone, and nobody could judge. This was the evening meal of thousands of elderly women across Britain who wanted something sweet, warm, and gentle after a day of nothing much happening. A bag of pudding rice cost 3 pence and lasted weeks. The milk was delivered to the doorstep. There was something deeply soothing about standing at the stove, stirring slowly, watching the rice transform. It was meditation before anyone called it that. Number 11. Sardines on toast stew. Not technically a stew, but made in 1 pan and eaten as a full meal. A tin of sardines in tomato sauce is tipped into a small saucepan with a splash of water, heated through, then poured over a thick slice of toast in a bowl. The toast soaks up the tomato sauce and becomes soft, almost like a dumpling, while the sardines break apart into salty, oily flakes. Sardines cost about 5 pence a tin and were rich in calcium and omega oils, though nobody called them that in the 1950s. They just knew it was good for the bones. This was the meal of Tuesday evenings and Thursday lunchtimes, quick and filling, eaten by the window or in front of the television when that finally arrived. 1 pan, 1 plate, done. Second pattern break. Nobody talks about the loneliness these meals were designed to fight. Cooking for 1 person is an act of self-respect that takes real discipline. It would be easier to skip meals, to eat biscuits for tea, to let the stove go cold. Every one of these meals represents a woman or a man who chose to feed themselves properly when nobody was watching, and nobody would have noticed if they did not. That is not sad. That is strength. And the meals they created deserve more than nostalgia. They deserve recognition. Number 10. Scotch broth, a hearty 1-pot staple. Pearl barley, diced lamb neck, carrots, turnip and leeks, everything into 1 pot with water and salt. Simmered for 2 hours until the barley swelled and the lamb fell to pieces. A cup of barley cost 2 pence and turned a thin soup into a thick, substantial meal. The lamb neck was the cheapest cut available, sometimes as little as 8 pence a pound. For pensioners in Scotland and the north of England, Scotch broth was the weekly anchor. Made on Monday and eaten through Wednesday, each bowl was reheated and slightly different as the barley continued to absorb the broth and the flavors concentrated. By Thursday, the pot was nearly solid. That was when it tasted best. A pint of milk heated with a bay leaf, thickened with a tablespoon of flour stirred into a knob of butter, then finished with a generous handful of grated cheese and a teaspoon of mustard. This was Welsh rarebit in soup form, and it was ingenious. A meal that tasted like effort, but took 10 minutes. Eaten with toast soldiers for dipping. The cheese melted into threads through the thickened milk, creating something rich and deeply savory. For a pensioner watching every penny, this was a hot meal that used only store-cupboard ingredients and a heel of cheese. Total cost in 1956 was about 5p. Total satisfaction was absolute. Number 8. Vegetable potage. Whatever vegetables were available went into the pot. Potato, carrot, onion, a leaf of cabbage, a stick of celery if there was one. They were covered with water and simmered until soft, then mashed roughly with a fork. The French had a name for it, but British grandmothers just called it soup. The beauty was in its flexibility. No two batches were the same, because no 2 days produced the same scraps. A single parsnip left over from Sunday could anchor the whole pot. A wilting leek gave it depth. This was waste reduction at its most practical, and it produced a thick, warming meal that cost almost nothing. For pensioners who could not get to the shops regularly, potage meant that whatever was left in the larder could become a proper dinner. Number 7. Bread and cheese pudding. Stale bread was layered in a saucepan with slices of cheese, covered with a beaten egg mixed into half a pint of milk, then cooked on the lowest heat, with a lid on until the egg set and the cheese melted. This was the stove-top version of a savory bread and butter pudding, and it was perfect for one. The stale bread soaked up the custard. The cheese went stringy and golden. The whole thing cost about 4p and used ingredients that would otherwise have been thrown away. It was filling enough to be supper and satisfying enough to feel like a proper meal. Some added a teaspoon of mustard to the egg mixture. Others laid sliced tomatoes between the layers. The principle was always the same. Nothing wasted. Everything used. One pot, one person, one good meal. Number 6. Lentil DHL. By the 1960s, Commonwealth immigration had brought new flavors to British cities, and pensioners in Birmingham, Leicester, and Bradford had started to adapt. Red lentils cooked with a diced onion, a pinch of turmeric, and a squeeze of lemon juice produced a thick, golden stew that cost almost nothing. A bag of lentils, at 6p, lasted a fortnight. The turmeric cost a few pennies and lasted months. Eaten with bread or on its own, dal was gentle, warming, and packed with protein. Some elderly residents learned the recipe from neighbors. Others found it in the back pages of women's magazines that had started to feature international cookery. However it arrived, dal became a quiet staple in the kitchens of pensioners who discovered that thrift had no borders. Number 5. Stewed apple and custard. Cooking apples from the garden or the market at 2p a pound were peeled and stewed with sugar and a splash of water until they collapsed into a tart, fragrant mush. Custard was made from powder, 2 tablespoons of birds to half a pint of milk. The apple went into the bowl first, and the custard was poured over. 1 saucepan for the apple. The same saucepan was rinsed and used for the custard. This was the pudding that doubled as supper on evenings when nothing savory appealed. The sharpness of the apple cut through the sweetness of the custard. The warmth of both settled in the stomach like a blanket. A whole week of stewed apple could be made from a single pound of Bramleys. It kept in the larder for days, improving as the sugars developed. Number 4. Kedgeree for one. A fillet of smoked haddock is poached in water in a small saucepan, flaked, then stirred into cooked rice with a chopped hard-boiled egg and a knob of butter. The fish flavored everything. The egg added richness. The rice stretched the whole meal into something generous, Kedgeree arrived from British India in the Victorian era, and it never left. By the 1950s, it was a staple of elderly households, especially among women who had grown up when the empire still meant something, and the taste of smoked fish carried memory as much as flavor. A fillet of haddock cost about 9p. One fillet made a generous portion with leftovers. The whole meal came together in one pot in under 20 minutes. Number 3. Cock-a-leekie. Chicken pieces, leeks, and prunes simmered together in water for an hour. The prunes dissolved into the broth, adding a sweetness that balanced the savory chicken. The leeks melted to silk. The chicken fell apart. This ancient Scottish soup was the meal of choice for elderly Scots who knew that a few chicken wings, too bony to eat any other way, could flavor a pot of soup that lasted 3 days. The prunes were the secret. They thickened the broth and added an unexpected depth that made the whole pot taste richer than it was. A handful of prunes cost 3p. A few chicken wings cost 6p. For less than a shilling, a pensioner had 3 days of meals and a kitchen that smelled of something wonderful. Number 2. Mutton broth. A scrag end of mutton, the cheapest cut the butcher sold, went into the pot with barley, root vegetables, and water. It simmered for 3 hours until the meat dissolved and the broth turned thick and pearly with rendered fat. In the 1950s, mutton was still widely available and cost about 1 shilling a pound for the cheapest cuts. A single piece of scrag end could produce enough broth for 4 days of eating. The barley swelled to fill the bowl, the vegetables softened into the background, and the mutton flavor, deeper and more complex than lamb, infused every spoonful. For elderly Britons living alone, mutton broth was the closest thing to a Sunday roast dinner that a single pot could produce. It required patience, not skill, and it rewarded that patience with a meal that tasted like somebody cared. Number 1. Stewed shin of beef. The meal that tops this list is the one that best represents everything these vintage one-pot meals stood for. Shin of beef, the hardest working muscle on the animal, cost less than a shilling a pound because nobody with a fast kitchen wanted it. But a pensioner with time and a single heavy pot could transform it. The shin went into the pot with an onion, a carrot, a potato, and water. Nothing more. Simmered on the lowest flame for 3 hours, the collagen in the shin broke down into gelatine, turning the cooking liquid into a glossy, rich gravy that set like jelly when it cooled. The meat, once impossibly tough, became soft enough to eat with a spoon. 1 piece of shin fed a person for 4 days. Monday it was stew. Tuesday the cold jelly was spread on bread like dripping. Wednesday the leftovers were reheated with a fresh potato. Thursday the pot was finally empty. The total cost was 1 shilling and 3p. The total nourishment was immense. This was the meal that proved cooking for one was not a lesser form of cooking. It was its own art, perfected by people who had nothing to waste and no one to impress, yet still insisted on eating well. That insistence, that quiet daily act of feeding yourself properly when the world had stopped noticing, is the real legacy of these 25 meals. Try one this week. The potato soup takes 10 minutes. The onion broth takes even less. When you eat it, think about the person who made it first. Alone in a cold kitchen, with a single pot and a wooden spoon, cooking something worth eating, because they decided they were worth the effort. Share which one you are going to try in the comments.